I guess Bob's not going to be here tonight.
No.
So we usually start our meetings with public comment. If anybody wants to, actually, does somebody want to take minutes?
We usually start with
Volunteers?
having no one volunteer to take it.
I can see if Carolyn wants to do it. Maybe. All right, I'll take them until she gets here, and then we'll see if she wants to. Okay, we're open for public comment at the beginning here. Is anybody here to say anything in particular? Yeah.
First, thank you very much for inviting the public to a meeting like this. And we appreciate it. I'm glad that you value public input because obviously a successful community is based upon the sum of all the parts. There are a couple of comments that I would like to make based upon the agenda that I believe was sent out. Specifically, let's begin with open space. And I'm quoting from, I believe, from your, whatever you call it, minutes or whatever. And it says, open space consists of 50 contiguous square feet per dwelling, or this can be waived by a finding that adequate outdoor space is provided to each unit through alternative means, such as a porch, deck, or green roof. Now, the last time I went to the meeting, somehow or other, that was not conveyed. I can't conceive of how a deck, a green roof, or a porch can be considered green space. And in point of fact, when you brought this issue up at your last meeting, I don't remember which member of your committee made a point that you couldn't have a little bit of space here, and a little space here, and a little bit of space there. That the space had to be connected. And now I see inserted into that minutes porches and decks, and I guess, I don't know if a green roof means that there are a couple of plants, or that the roof is painted green. I'm being somewhat facetious, but whatever. So that was confusing. Then, in various comments about the change in regulations, one of my big concerns has to do with changes that are going to be effected equally. Unfortunately, I'm left with the impression that URC may have different guidelines than URA. In other words, I think that in terms of social equality, whatever other words you may want to use, if I choose to buy a single-family home in URA, even next to Smith College, and I satisfy your various requirements and decide to turn into a two-family, I'm wondering, and I follow your guidelines, I know what the response is going to be. And the response is going to be not going to be favorable. Yet, under the same criteria, if that's done in URC, well, there's going to be a different response. So I am concerned that the guidelines that you're setting forth are going to be proposed equally throughout the city. Then last but not least, there was a comment that I read recently. And to quote, "The rhythm of buildings or a neighborhood is created by the spaces between them." That to me really sums up, I think, the feeling among a lot of us. Infill has a very benign connotation. However, infiltration is rather sinister. Let's hope that some of the suggestions that you're going to make, some of the proposals that you're going to make, will be benign for the whole community.
Can you read your quote again?
The last one?
Yeah.
"The rhythm of buildings or a neighborhood is created by the spaces between the buildings in that neighborhood."
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Would you entertain just a point of clarification before we go on?
without getting into the substance of what you said, but the clarification is that I think you must be referring to Northampton. It was a draft document that has never been reviewed by the ZRC. It wasn't minutes of any previous meeting. It reflects no action. And we'll talk later about the process. It was one or two members of this committee authorized it to go out, and before any of the other members of this committee had even seen it or had a chance to discuss it.
Fine.
So it's not
Okay.
in any sense a proposal of the ZRC.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I also want to make one point of clarification. Zoning zoning divides the city into districts, and the districts have different standards. So URC is currently different from URA and URB.
Yes, I understand that. However, some of the ideas that you're proposing vis-a-vis for URC, URB, and location of certain areas of URA, those areas could be considered in the same guidelines as URC. So I'm really concerned that URA, because they're up in a different neck of the woods and have a different base, that they're going to be treated equally. I recognize that there are different zoning concerns, but I still maintain the idea that social equality, neighborhood equality, etc., need to be, how would I say, enforced or regulated throughout the city with an even hand.
So would it be fair to say that we should change all the zoning? If we change something for URC, we should be changing it for URB equally and URA equally.
I think that would be more along what I'm looking for, yes.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. My name's Arnold Levinson. I live in 14 Hancock Street. Excuse me.
I'm Adam Cohen from North Street. I want to expand on a couple of Arnie's points. I'm visualizing the zoning map. There's a particular patch of URA that I think abuts URC. It's the area up on the hill around Smith College. And I think the particular issue there is it's certainly within easy walking distance of downtown. And so it can seem unfair if some densification is imposed on URB and URC, but not on that patch of URA. I understand URA is quite a bit bigger than that, encompasses a wide range of properties. So in my mind, I'm thinking about that particular part. You might be thinking of others. But that part of URA has come up before as a kind of a social equity issue because it's so close to downtown. The other issue I wanted to expand on is I also had concerned about green roofs and porches being counted as open space, because if you go in that direction, you are moving in the direction of privatizing open space. Obviously, only residents are going to have access to a green roof. I don't think that's a healthy direction for Northampton to go in. I'm not opposed to green roofs, but I don't think they should be counted as part of open space requirements. Thanks.
I want to respond to that one too. We're talking about private open space with zoning, only private open space. We're talking about open space that's associated with a private residence or a private residence in this case, because we're talking about residential districts. So
Right.
it's not privatized, it's private.
True, but I think the public gets more enjoyment from a front lawn than from somebody's green roof. I think that's the key point in how it looks, how it makes the neighborhood look. I think there is a meaningful difference between the two things when you're talking about open space. I understand it's all private property.
Okay.
Okay, should we add to the agenda this point of talking about process now?
Seems like it's hanging in the air.
Okay,
Hard not to.
so I sent out an email this afternoon that had my research on our requirements under the Open Meetings Act, and I apologize, I completely misunderstood. I thought that I was obligated to send information out that's been requested to me. It seems that our requirements are only that we have to release documents after committee meetings, not before. So I'm fine with that policy of not making things available to the public until after we have meetings. On the one hand, we have a choice. On the other hand, then it allows for the public to be more involved in the process. So those are the trade-offs. I don't really care how the committee wants to handle it. We have a few more proposals coming out over the next month. So just tell me how you want to do it, and I'm happy to follow your lead.
Well, I do care. I think we should sort of stick to the way that we talked a long time about process, and you produced a very nice flow chart at one point that had topics identified, and then a process by which we would come up with proposals. We would take the proposals to the various constituent groups. We'd come back, we would discuss them at this level. We would formulate something that we thought was, not a finished product by any means, but not just raw ideas either, somewhere in the middle. When we and at that point, take it out for public reaction. And that's the process we'd agreed on, and I think we should stick with it. And so I think both that process as well as kind of common sense as well as the open meetings law would suggest that we at least have a chance to review it as a committee and talk about it before it goes out.
Yeah, I think, part of it is because the public perception will be, oh, this came out from the ZRC, and somehow we reviewed it, we endorsed it, we okayed it, and that's not the case. I mean, this is, for some of us, or at least for me, I'm not sure how much anybody's had any previous knowledge about this. I certainly didn't. But, what's in here, you cannot say that this came from the ZRC. This came from one or two people in the ZRC, but the perception will be, and I feel bad for some people in the public who saw something like this, that was not reviewed or okayed or vetted or in any way, I think, by the ZRC as a whole, ready to go out for review. And that's where the misconceptions that can cause in the community are hard to fix sometimes. So it's unfortunate that it happened, but I really don't think we should. I think something that has to go public has to come public from the ZRC, not from individuals on the ZRC.
Can the public comment on this?
Well, before Adam, I understand what you were thinking, and that I think it's great for the public to have information prior to the meeting because they want to show up and be informed and be involved, and that, but at the same time, the way we include the public, that I think, because I think it's fine for us to present the materials here, and often we have materials we can share with the public to be part of the discussion and look over the same things we're looking at. But it also does get back to that issue of what is ZRC approved and what isn't, and I think if we put it on the table here at the meeting and the public's free to hear it right now, that we avoid all that. So. But I understand the temptation.
And it's also not like none of us ever participated in any discussions about it. I think you were attempting to synthesize a lot of discussions, incorporate a lot of the ideas that were coming out of the committee as it was unfolding this not yet proposal. But I do agree that in order to have an informed public, the public needs to know what process we're using, and then we need to stick with it. And I think the process we had set up was we would decide what was going out as a representation of our committee before people saw it. So I would support that.
My apologies. Actually, we went back a couple times on email, and I couldn't remember what we had talked about a year and a half ago or so. So, yes.
Well, probably not the only one there.
Okay, so it seems like that will be what we do from now on.
We'd still, I don't think we officially had Carolyn agree to take the minutes when we appointed her when she was out of the meeting.
No, I've been taking them still. Carolyn, would you mind taking some notes from here on out? I can email you what I have so far.
Did Adam have a further comment, or?
as a member of the public, I really appreciate getting these documents beforehand so we can do some preparation and research. I'm concerned that if you wait until the ZRC has established some sort of consensus and issue something, that opinions will have started to harden, something will have got some momentum, and whereas the public might have had more of a chance to influence the course of events at an earlier stage, that opportunity is lost. I mean, I see the public, I mean, especially lay people, start at such a disadvantage in this process. These things are so complicated. Doing the research takes time that, like, anything at all that makes it a little easier for the public to have a little more time to look into these things, I think I'm very grateful for. And I hope, you know, if the problems you're talking about could be cured by stamping the document, you know, with whatever qualifiers and disclaimers, you know, that about its preliminariness, you know, I think that would be a better cure than just not letting the public have these things, or somebody has to come here physically to see these documents. I'm really struggling to think of the downside to releasing these documents ahead of time, and I think there's a lot of upside, and I think it shows respect for the public when you do that, when the people have the information at a similar time that the committee members do. And I think it's a core mission of the ZRC is public outreach while we have a committee. So I hope you'll consider that.
Hopefully there won't be any downside, but there is a potential downside. If for every one person who shows up here, there's 10 people out there who saw this and are, you know, upset that the ZRC, as part of its infill proposals, is to take your example, proposing that a green roof on the 3rd floor of a building is going to count towards an open space requirement, then it kind of poisons the water out there. It gets folks riled up and prepared to be opposed to what the ZRC is going to ultimately go forward, when it wasn't, when, you know, had that been vetted here, I think there's a very good chance it would not have gone out at all. And so I hope there isn't that downside, but there's the potential for that downside when something that hasn't been vetted at the staff level, at the ZRC level, goes out and leaves the impression that it's from the ZRC. I agree it would be better if it came with all the caveats that you suggest. But I think there is a potential downside, and I think we've struggled here to find out where in the policy development process is the appropriate time to roll something out. And I think you can do it too early, and I think you can do it too late. And we've been trying to find some middle ground. When it's gone through enough vetting that there aren't technical flaws in it, there aren't things that are blatantly illegal, there aren't typos in it, you know, it's gone through some level of review. Then you roll it out there, and it's by far from being a fully developed proposal at that point. But it's been vetted enough that you're not going to have to run away from it because it had some obvious errors. So I hope there isn't that downside, but I think there's the potential when you roll something out before it's time.
I still think it's to your advantage to hear as many possible public objections as early in the process as possible. I think the true downside is that something gets past the public here, it's enacted into law, then somebody actually builds something or wants to build something relying on that law, and then the public freaks out. And I think that's the biggest downside that I see. I think I think you want to hear every reasonable, conceivable public objection right here and now, so you can address it here up front and not get invested in something that actually turns out to be very unpopular.
But it's important to remember we're not enacting anything. I mean, we had a whole bunch of ideas. We went to the public. Now we're thinking of more ideas. There's like so many stages before anything gets built from what we're saying in this room. So I think it's important to realize your input doesn't end tonight because we're going to come up with recommendations. And if we come up with recommendations that only two of the group have seen and endorsed, then you're also not hearing what the committee thinks. Because we are trying to have some groupthink here, some consensus. And I think that's when you want to see how you feel. Right now you're responding to 1 or 2 people. That's not a representation of 8 minds' approaches. And you will get several. I know Steve often tells us, well, we submit proposals, then it goes to this committee, they're going to hear it, then it's going to, I mean, there's so many stages where the public's going to be invited to put in their ideas. So and I know you'll be there, filming and commenting, so.
Well, a couple of quick things. I know you want to move on. One is, I think this is a very important stage, the early stage.
Yep.
When things rolling down to ordinance committee and city council, that's a lot of momentum behind it. It's very, very hard for the public to meaningfully alter things at that point, many times, just from what I've seen in the past few years. And the other thing is, the meetings that I've attended generally, I haven't seen a huge excess of public comment. You know, it doesn't seem like you're getting so many comments at these meetings that it's like gumming up the whole process. So I think, you know, encouraging and indulging it is a safer course at this point.
You have another hand?
Yeah, I just along with what Adam said, I do remember, just to speak to what you're talking about, Tom, is the article did say 2 years in the making, like coming up with it. So it's as a person just in the city, just reading that, it's like, oh, they've been working on this for 2 years. Now I'm going to come in and say something. So there is this feeling like you guys have been working on this for a long time, and now you finally have really come up with some ideas and possibly, you know, solid plans. And so that's why I think maybe there's an impression. I certainly had that impression, like, okay, this has been in the works. And so that's one problem, maybe the communication through the, you know, the newspaper, the article, maybe it should have been a different title. You know, these are what we've been working, thinking, but early phase kind of thing. And then the other thing is, did you have a comment about that? Or?
Was there a newspaper?
Yeah, remember, it was about, and it said 2 years, and remember that article? And it said 2 years in the plan. Do you guys remember that? Anything
You're
remember
talking
that
about the
article?
forums? For the forums, it was like a month
It was before
ago.
the forums.
Yeah, okay.
And it said 2 years in the, so it was sort of led me to believe, wow, gosh, I'm getting on the bandwagon late here. So you almost feel like, oh, comment at this point, what good is it? So that was my impression after reading the article. So that's one thing. And then two, when you had mentioned the constituencies that you go out to show your ideas, could you just give me an idea of who these groups are that you share these ideas and then come back here before you go to the public? I mean, maybe, I just heard somebody more. You mentioned it. But,
The idea, well, for example, we're going to be talking about the agricultural, the chicken ordinance. We're going to be talking about that tonight.
okay.
And so there are obvious folks who are experts in that field and who have a vested interest in it and need to be involved in it. And so we didn't put it out to the public. We went to them first and spent a lot of time kind of trying to get it right. And on this one, I don't know if there was any particular group of expertise that was.
I think you and Joel at the very beginning went and spoke with some different groups about things relating to infill. You spoke with neighborhood groups, is that right? And maybe some
Right, I
developers.
mean, not specifically to this issue, but yeah, we talked about infill. We had Florence Civic, we had all the neighborhood groups get together, Ward 3, Florence Civic, Bay State, Leeds, we met with individuals, we met with developers, we met with real estate, we met with, God, this was 18 months ago, so I can't quite remember everybody we met with, but that was for a particular piece of it. But I think in that case, we were trying to gather information about what are the issues that are affecting people with infill. So that was particularly, and a lot of it was about downtown, but a lot of it was also, you know, about moving out towards URC, B, and A. So, yeah, I mean, we talked about to a lot of different people over the last 2 years. And then we've had a number of public forums. We've had half dozen, 8? I'm trying to think,
Right.
public forum, 9 public forums. We've had, I don't know if you know.
4.
Well, no, we had the high school one. Joel and I had the one with the different civic associations. We had 2 last month. We had 2 4 months ago.
Oh,
So,
I see you're counting, yes.
right,
So that's 7, right?
yeah, so I don't know how many citywide ones we've had as well. So
Plus all the stuff around King Street.
plus all the stuff around King Street. I mean, I don't know how many.
Business community,
there were
elected people,
Lots.
citizens, even your committee reached out to a lot of people.
But I think just to be clear, this particular proposal doesn't necessarily reflect any of this consultation with constituent groups.
But it does reflect public input
Yeah,
from
input
the
from-
meetings,
Right.
from public forums.
And also at
Can-
our own meetings, we've had people come and talk about
Yeah.
home occupation.
And it's a
members
long
of church.
version of a proposal that we proposed 2 meetings ago and was discussed by the group, and they asked for this long version and now are getting it. So they basically endorsed in principle all the stuff that was,
Now
Well,
detailed.
you're reaching with that one.
Well, it reflects an awful lot, it's just that we haven't had the
Yeah,
chance
let's
to
put
Maybe
chew
it's
it up.
fine.
Let's
in
put this
group.
aside for a moment, because that actually isn't right away. Do you have anything else?
No, that's.
Okay, thank you.
So we have agreement about,
It sounds
Process
like, I think, yeah, we're not going to release documents until after our meetings, and then they just get released per our requirements under the Open Meetings Act.
yeah, and I don't know how many more we have,
Hopefully not very many.
but also if we're releasing them after people can come to the next one and say what they feel. They don't have
Oh,
to wait till
right.
it gets to
I see it, yeah,
city council and
yeah,
even the zoning committee.
yeah, there will still be opportunities. If I can actually go back really quick to public comment, I forgot about this. We received a letter from the Grow Food Northampton group, and I was asked to read it aloud during the public comment session, part of the meeting. Dear members of the Zoning Revision Committee, Grow Food Northampton wishes to express its support for the revised ordinance on the keeping of fowl in Northampton. We have participated in and witnessed the extensive public input that has gone into the drafting of the ordinance, and are supportive of its efforts to make backyard chicken owning more accessible and viable for Northampton residents, while offering guidelines that maintain public health and positive community relations. Sincerely, Lily Lombard, Executive Director. So with that, I think that closes the public comments, a little later than usual. Do we want to go with the original agenda where we go through home occupations and the chickens first, and then get to the dimensional proposal? Is that okay to do that order still?
Well, the only reason we might want to change it is we have people from the public, members of the public that are interested in what you and Dylan wanted to talk about.
My only concern is that we may not get through all this tonight, and if we don't, then that means that we'll be not getting to this tonight. And we
Okay.
wanted to finish them, I think, and have them truly be done. Maybe we could just be really fast.
I think we can be fast with these.
Okay. Home occupations then. Carolyn, do you want to talk about what might remain here, if anything?
You mean as open issues, what might remain as open
Yeah.
issues?
Or do we just
Yeah.
want, how do we want to do this?
Would you
Yeah,
just bring us
hold
up to date on,
The changes.
I mean, we discussed this pretty thoroughly.
Yeah,
And
so the biggest
this
issue,
This reflects where we were at the end of our last discussion of this, pretty much.
right, you got red line version, so you all discussed at the, following the forum about, the idea and, of sort of creating a 3-tiered system where there'd be by right, which is what's by right now, and then a registration for anyone who wants to have clients or have employees work with sort of up to, and then we discussed having an average but a maximum daily. So average of 30 vehicle round trips per week, with no more than 7 in any given day. But there would be registration with the building department that would spell out hours of operation, and the type of business and the anticipated vehicle round trips, and that anything in excess of that would then trigger the special permit. So that would be sort of the interim, sort of middle ground, so that anyone could contact the building commissioner and find out whether a home office registration had been received. And at that point, too, it could be reviewed to make sure it does fall within those parameters of number of vehicle trips anticipated. And then hours of operation between 7 and 7 and 8 p.m. I don't know if that was, I think I had in my notes 8 to 8.
Mhm.
And I put 7 in because that's typically when that sort of coincides with other aspects in the zoning that relate to business functions starting up at 7 in the morning and noise and those kinds of things. And then also there are jobs that start at 7 in the morning. So I think, you know, there was a concern early on when you were looking at this about trying to be as all-inclusive and not just focusing on white-collar jobs, but sort of more of a rounded approach. So I felt like 7 a.m. sort of would grab potentially a bigger spectrum of those employees or employers. And then the other piece of the other part of the change was in the special permit, then just adding, instead of the 5 vehicle round trips per day, an average weekly of 30 with no more than 7 on any given day within those hours of operation.
So did we, I don't remember us going up to 7. Did we do that last week?
No.
We did it too. You all talked about sort of the average and the maximum, and so looking at what that, you know, if someone only wants to have 2 days of work or what have you, but maybe they would do 7, you know, per day, still doesn't reach the 30 hours maximum. I think there was a lot of back and forth. I think Bob threw out a number that was a little bit higher, and then there was some back and forth. So I don't think there was any consensus at that time.
Okay.
But I just put in a number sort of based on what I heard you all talking about, and on sort of the lower end spectrum to get back closer to 5. But it wouldn't really make sense to have an average if you can't go above 5.
Right. It works for me, and I like the idea of the average, the arbitrary 5 a day always. I wondered about that. Just 2 minor things, though. In the new language in number 4, there's the reference to the requested vehicle trips. It's not so much a request, it's anticipated. Elsewhere, it's referred to as anticipated. It's a minor thing, but
Yep.
why don't we just throughout call it anticipated vehicle trips? And then the final section, unless approved through special permit, hours of operation must be within. So I would just, everything else under 4 talks about the vehicle trips. Maybe that's its own separate item, number 5 or something.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're looking for hours of operation in here, you look at.
Right, I guess the intention was, and maybe it's a sub-bullet, the intention is really to sort of have one paragraph that addresses things that need registration. So if you're just working in your home and you're not seeing all of those, that you could be able to work at midnight if you wanted to. I mean, if you just.
Okay.
So I can figure out a way to finesse that, but I get what you're saying.
It's automatically Monday to Friday, right?
No. I mean, that's what we talked about. I think the idea of 30 was if you have 6 work days as opposed to 5 work days. That's how you get to 30, because 5 times 6 is 30. So, you know, you started with 5 vehicle trips per day, but some people, you know, again, it sort of broadens the spectrum of employment type.
I wasn't thinking about the vehicle trips as much as the hours. 7 a.m. on a Saturday or Sunday. Feels good.
It kind of depends on what business you're in.
Oh yeah, no, I think it is. But I'm just thinking of your neighbors, no matter what your business is.
Well, but in any case, you can't hear anything off the property. Doesn't matter.
It's still supposed to be invisible.
Yeah, it's supposed to be invisible.
Quiet and invisible.
Quiet. You
Activity
can't
level.
smell. You can't see. You can't detect the operation off the property.
It's just the car park. I hope it doesn't get into one person detection versus, you know, it's Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way it is now, though. I mean.
Yeah.
Right. Doesn't mean it's good, but yeah, okay.
No, but I mean, that's sort of the function of it, and we don't get a lot of complaints, is what I'm saying.
So
I did have. Sorry, Mark.
in terms of the trips per week and using the average, after talking with Louis, what seemed to be the most workable in terms of somebody registering a complaint was based on what they would observe in a day. That if somebody said, oh, well, you saw me on Friday when I have, you know, my 7 clients, you didn't see me the rest of the days when I only had 2, so that that it puts the onus, if we come up with the average, then we're putting the onus on the person making the complaint to observe the average over a week. And I think if we just cap it for a day, you know, on a daily basis, it becomes far more enforceable. You know, it's a more reasonable threshold for a neighbor to document.
So you want the average out and just put it back?
Yeah, I think the average just gets, and it gets too complicated for Louis and for the neighbor. Although, you know, and within all of this, if the business really is under the radar and quiet, that sixth trip is not going to be a big deal. You know, that it's really about what's that threshold that's going to set somebody off. And that, so and the other thing is the 5 is what we vetted at the forums, and that there was some people said, well, it's not quite enough, and then there was a lot of pushback saying that's too much, and that I think going to 7 per day would just be too much. I mean, if I look at it in terms of, you know, if I'm a counselor and I'm seeing 5 people a day, that's 5 trips right there, you know, I'm almost to the point of like, that's 25 clients per week. I could get an office. And that part of what we're trying to do is get that startup going so that you then move into a commercial space. And I think if we're creating the conditions where the home actually becomes the commercial space of choice, then we've gone beyond, you know, like being the incubator to creating something else.
Well,
So.
I don't think I thought of it as only an incubator, though. There are people that really want to have their office in the house. Maybe I just have a friend who's decided that's where I want to be right now. She's a little older, doesn't want to have to go.
And then, but then they can go to special permit. That once that, you know, if they really wanted, we're allowing for that to happen as well. You know, that, you know what, maybe you know, I'm seeing 8 clients a day, and, you know, and there's a process for them to go through. Or they can get an office downtown.
But the spirit of the infill we're talking about, the mixed use in neighborhoods is, I agree with Tom, not to limit it to just sort of incubators moving on, but maybe the person who really does see 20 to 25 people a week at their home, averaging 4 or 5, but the occasional day, the fluke is 7. I think we want to make it relatively straightforward for that person to be able to do that without having to go to special permit. So I agree, we threw out there 5, and yeah, I came away thinking maybe it's about the right number, because there seemed to be about an equal number of folks who thought it was too little, thought it was too much. But I think to say an average of 30 a week is pretty much consistent with that.
But yeah, you're hearing that the enforceability factor is made. That's the most compelling one of your arguments.
Well,
and that's the other piece.
How would you feel about leaving it this way, subject to going back for Louis to comment as to the enforceability?
Well, I think the issue really for Louis is I'm not sure that would necessarily change. I think the fact of registration sort of helps towards that enforcement, because you put it to paper. You said, I'm planning on seeing 7 on this day, and 2 on this day, and 2 on this other day. Or whatever the number is that you guys decide. I think the idea is you've got it down, so if someone complains, you go back to the person and you say, the person conducting the home business, to say, what do you got? You know, what's going on this day? Did you see more than 7? Did you see more than 2 on this day? What have you? So, you know, whatever the number is that you come up with, I think Louis is fine with the registration, and that certainly helps in the enforcement.
You split the difference and call it 6.
Yeah, because the other thing that came up, and I hadn't realized it, was the idea of Saturdays. And do we want to say no Sundays? I mean, we're assuming 6 days, or, you know.
Depends on what religion you are.
Thank you, there you go.
I've got a neighbor who's off every Wednesday and Thursday, you know, so.
We could reinstate the blue laws for this.
Go for it.
Where does that leave us? Are we
6 and
keeping
30?
it?
Or every day at 5.
So that was one?
7 days a week at 5.
You mean you have to shut it down at 5 instead of 8?
No, the 5
maximum
trips.
5.
Oh,
Yeah, except.
Yeah, we're not gonna say what day it is, you know, it can be a Sunday. it
So
could
that's
be a
back to our original
That's the
language
original.
of no more than 5 trips per day, because we didn't
We
specify
never
what
said
day.
what days.
Okay,
Take it away.
yes.
I have a real concern with putting down a number that doesn't have like a plus or minus after it for number of trips per day. I think it's open to abuse, and that's, I do testing and assessments, and there's always a range. You always get a range because behavior doesn't come up. It's not a mathematical equation. Behavior has a range of behavior. So if Jim is worried about you can't test it, or you can't know how you're going to figure out if somebody is doing an average or not. That may be one issue, but to say 5 a day and make it a rigid 5 puts the range of behavior into a digital form, and behavior isn't digital. So maybe somebody has a 7-day, 7 trips on one day, but if a neighbor is counting on that one day, and it says 5, and you can 5 in one day, well, you just broke the law. There's no way to have a range. So somehow or other, whether it's an average for a week or within a whatever, I just feel like no test of human behavior can put a number and have it be accurate without putting in that range. And I see it a lot in doing test analysis. So for instance, you get benefits if you have this number score, and you don't get benefits if you have 1 point over. So how many times do you have a person who didn't quite make the exam because they got a 69 versus a 70, or you get Social Security benefits if you are tested and you have mental issues and you get a certain IQ number, but it's 1 number off. There's always a range.
Well, I understand the range piece, but when it gets to enforcement, and that was really a big concern we heard at the forum, was that people were, you know, like, all right, you're talking this idea, but how's it really going to lay out? How is it that, you know, the city's going to be able to enforce this? And that I think that if we start getting into the ranges, you know, looking at weekly averages and making it difficult for people to document what the issues might be, that we're making it, we're inviting a lot of distrust from people who had those concerns.
So you could say over 5 visits for several days, as opposed to 5 clunk. If the format of the law is being described because we can't figure out a way to enforce it, then there's something wrong with the law. I mean, that's how I feel.
In response, that if we're asking to broaden it so people can do these things, the big concern was, how are we going to be able to push back? Because we're concerned about, I mean, throughout the city, people were thinking we were opening a can of worms, that things were going to go crazy based on 5 trips. And therefore, I think us having a really clear method. I mean, the other thing is, maybe we could put an escalator in there, that if this works for 2 years, it comes before the planning board, and then this other clause gets invited. Should we go to the 7 trips and the average of 30 per week?
I like Sydney's argument, and it still makes sense. If we're saying that for someone to, you know, drop a dime and report their neighbor, and the neighbor gets hauled in and has to explain and go through all that, then I think it's only fair that the neighbor be asked to document over some period of time, as opposed to, one day would trigger this. I think, maybe a week isn't I don't know, but I think you need to allow for the fact that there could be one day that's different. And I think it is therefore appropriate to look at an average, and to say 30 for a week is one way to look at an average. So I'm still comfortable with it. So
You're comfortable with the 30 and 7?
Yeah. But another comment.
I mean, if you have an average, first of all, if there's a complaint, whoever is going to investigate the complaint is going to have a dialogue with the person having the business. So they're going to know. I mean, if someone has a business and all of a sudden their neighbor complains, whoever is investigating that is going to come out and have a dialogue with the person owning the business. So there's going to be some discussion about that. So the person that owns the business is not, is going to be aware of it, is going to become aware of it. So, what I'm hearing is that this is going to become a police state, that you're going to have the, people are going to be in trouble if they have 6 trips versus 5. I think an average, we have to be reasonable. If there's a complaint, then the person complaining is going to have some reason for complaining other than that person went 1 trip over 5. Maybe there's something else that the person is complaining about. I don't know. I just think 5, a number is too rigid, because if you have a business, I think it will vary. It can vary. And I think it's just too restrictive. I like the average.
You want to say something about we are going to continue having public comment, so it's just us. That's what
Yeah, I
some
think
people
so.
say.
Thank you for your comments. So, committee, how are we going to resolve this? We need to make a decision. Do we want to go and get more information from Louis? I mean, he said in the last time we talked to him that this was perfectly enforceable, and I think that it doesn't change with this new language. Do you agree with that? Okay. So, so it's not about enforcement. It's about, do we want to allow for a weekly average with a maximum of 7 in any single day, or do we want to just say 5 a day and that's the end of it? Seems like Jim wants to go the 5 a day route. We've heard that at least 2 people are comfortable with the way the language is now, and we haven't heard from anybody else. So Peter, Stephen?
I'm fine with a 30 on average and 7 a day. I mean, it's a starting point. What's going to happen is if we find out either through Louis or through the public that it's not enforceable or it's causing a lot of problems, then it can be adjusted. But I think we've got to start somewhere. No matter what number we pick, and this happens all the time, pick a number. And some people are going to like it, some aren't going to like it. But I think Jim's point of as many people liked it as didn't like it, so that's a good sign. So it's in the middle. So.
Well, the other thing is, this is a recommendation to the planning board. Planning board's going to have to go out. There's going to be a public hearing where you could get a lot more people involved than the numbers that showed up to the forum. So you're going to get, there may be a lot more people going on both sides of the fence that might say too high, too low, and then, can be vetted some more in that way.
Well, let me ask this. So did Louis get a chance to look at the 7 and the 30? Because I'd be willing to go back to him and say, because when Bob and I met with him, we talked about the 5. So, if Louis' fine with it, he thinks it's enforceable, and he thinks it's something that'll work for somebody making a complaint, then I'm willing to consider that.
Well, that was my proposal to try and move us on. Subject,
all right, so
subject to Louis looking at it and saying that it works for him, could you go along with it?
Okay, I'd agree to that.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have anything else on home occupations? I actually do have one comment if nobody else has one.
Go for it.
I'll just throw it out there. I'm wondering, what was the thinking behind the sentence, for the purposes of this section, Trips don't include trips made by the resident owner of the business.
I think that came up at the last meeting.
That came up at the last
Yeah.
meeting. It seems to me, I'm just wondering, if it's one trip, that seems reasonable, because you could just make sort of an incidental trip as an owner, but what if you're just in and out all day, then none of your trips count?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, if I'm in and out all day at my house, I live there.
Yeah, we already have that, right.
Can my neighbor say,
That's why
sorry,
we
you're going to
say
the
it
grocery
that way.
store too often? I think you should stop. I don't think that's,
Okay.
You got 4 or 5
Okay.
kids, you gotta pick them up at 4
Okay.
different schools, you're in
So
and
that
out
was
all
the
day.
thinking, yeah?
My only last comment too would be that I'm hearing us starting to think too of this being people in incubation or working towards full-time work, and just recognizing how many people are working at patchwork of jobs nowadays, or putting together part-time jobs, and some people are just happy doing that too. So it's not that all of these jobs would be working towards some sort, all these businesses would be a full-time business. And then not that we should think that that's what people are necessarily aiming towards as well.
Yeah, what was that statistic we found? We actually threw it into the... Telecommuting opportunities have increased 40% in the last 3 years. So there are more and more folks working out of their homes, not hoping that they wind up with the office downtown, but that's where they and their employer want them to be. Or where they, just as a home occupation, they want to be there.
And people aren't worried about the telecommuter. They're worried about those people showing up to visit the telecommuter.
So in terms of enforcement then, we're not really counting every vehicle trip, we're just counting external vehicle trips, non-owner.
Not the owner.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else on this? Great. Sounds like if Louie's good with it, we're good with it. First thing to move. Okay. Chickens.
And ducks,
Yeah.
But not sheep or goats.
not capons.
So I think that I made all the changes that we talked about last meeting. I added the ducks in. The Board of Health can create standards.
I just had a question about line, are you on line 1, are you working down?
No, I wasn't yet.
Okay.
Go on.
Well, just in line 1, it had that sentence, it says additional chicks and chickens are not subject to this lift limit.
Yeah, a chick.
Like, sure.
So, okay, so any number of,
So you could maybe get like a bunch of chicks,
A cute fluffy little.
the little guys, and then maybe some of them you get rid of for whatever reason, and you only keep a certain amount.
Plants are cute after that phase.
Or
You don't want them
did,
anymore.
was the thinking that chicks or ducklings for purposes of replacing the flock or whatever?
Yeah.
So the way it usually works when you get chickens is you get a box of little chicks in the mail, and you put them under our incubator, and then they grow up into full-size
In the mail?
chickens. Yeah. in the
Yeah.
mail.
Or
So
they
you
might
start
count.
with a whole lot, and you expect many of them to not make it to hen size.
There you go.
Okay.
it's FedEx.
Chickens are.
Wouldn't have too many trips at that.
So we simplified all of the language about fencing and all of that to number 3. Owners must maintain fowl on their property, except if it's on the premises of another person with his or her permission. So that's the only thing that left there. All the rest of this is pretty much what you've seen, except somewhat simplified based on our discussions.
I couldn't remember the items that remain in number 4. Were we talking about those were also more appropriately Board of Health, or did we?
I didn't have a note on it.
What are you asking us?
Carolyn,
Oh,
did you?
The 3 items?
Dust and odor.
Yeah.
I
Carolyn,
mean,
do you remember that?
typically that's Board of Health stuff, but, I think, I'm not sure, well, I could pull up the existing, that section of the ordinance, because there may be some similar language to that. I mean, probably doesn't hurt to have it in there, although it's not standard zoning.
It's kind of analogous to what we're saying for home occupation.
Yeah.
And just so when, this is called a framework. That would mean these would be the points that then get turned into zoning language. Is opposed to the other home business, which
Actually,
we're
it's
thinking,
zoning.
right, zoning language.
Yes.
So what state does this go to whomever in and when and how? Do you rewrite this in zoning language to someone?
No, I think it would just go forward as a recommendation. You know, part of it is a recommendation to Board of Health, and the other part would be to the planning board.
Like it is here.
And then like the planning board says, we want you to write it, or we don't.
Yeah, I mean, whenever they have time to, I mean, they've got a bunch of zoning stuff in front of them now. There's sort of a backlog of zoning, so, yeah, it would come
Can we ask
forward.
you to write it and give it to them as written form, like the home occupation?
What's that?
Can we ask you to write it and give it to them in a written form, like you are with a home occupation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it takes that much because it's really just amending that section 5.3, so it's a pretty simple process. Yeah.
Did you guys meet with the Board of Health? Did they know about it?
And so actually, Ben from the Board of Health asked me to add on-site slaughtering is prohibited back in. We had pulled that out into the Board of Health recommendations, but he said he wasn't sure that they were actually going to write standards to go along with this, so at minimum he wanted to see, so some of these things might be in the handout or something like that as guidelines, but not necessarily actually required. So he just asked me to add back in on-site slaughtering is prohibited.
On the zoning side?
Yeah, to just leave it in our framework.
How does that work with chickens where you call them all the time?
I know, what, you have to send them somewhere?
And you can't send
Someone's
them
gonna do
anywhere
it?
because
Maybe the rabbi kosher them and stuff? I don't get that. What was the reasoning, Danielle?
local farms aren't gonna want you to bring your diseased chickens to their farm.
I mean, just walk across your neighbor's yard and slaughter.
People I know have chickens have to bring them to somewhere to get them.
What's that?
People I know have chickens have to bring them somewhere to get them slaughtered. They don't have, like, traveling butchers who'll show up at your house. They
I
usually
think
bring
there
them.
is
You
a
have
traveling
butchers
butcher.
who show up at your house.
CESA's either has that or is working on it.
And the other thing is, we did have, there was a number of people who supported this provision of not having slaughtering within the city limits, chicken folks, that,
Yeah.
they
I
were
think the
mostly
agricultural-
supportive. I mean, a lot of the chicken folks we were talking with were talking about, you know, keeping their chickens until,
Forever.
you know, forever, yes, until their old age. So that's why these flocks were getting so big.
It was about
Right.
eggs and not,
Causes
dinner.
problems.
pets.
Are we distinguishing between slaughtering and culling? In other words, killing but not cutting up into little pieces? Culling versus slaughtering
Get right
and
into
cutting
it.
into pieces?
Well, and what about,
I think that killing a
Thanks,
chicken
Chris.
on your site is what the language is supposed to be speaking to. And we had heard it from some of the chicken folks, well, we heard mixed things from the chicken folks,
Right.
but some of them were in support of that, and then the Board of Health and also the Agricultural Commission wanted to limit slaughtering on properties, just because I guess there's, I don't know, you could spread disease that way. I don't know that much about it.
It offends their sensibilities.
It could offend neighbors.
Right, I think
that was
that's,
part of it, that like you could upset your neighbor's kids or your neighbors by slaughtering on site.
and again, this could be something for down the road, you know, should this work out with the increased numbers, that somebody could put that proposal forward again and say, you know, 2-3 years, this has been great, can we consider this proposal? Slaughtering on site.
Indoor slaughtering. Can you do it indoor?
You know, that's down the road, I don't want to talk about it.
in the privacy of your home, I think you can slaughter.
Yeah, we can't. I don't know, okay.
But we haven't had an outcry saying that we need to do it, and there are enough people saying they don't think it's what should happen, so then that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me from any practical point of view, but if the Ag Commission says that it makes sense. I guess
Ag,
I
Board of
trust it.
Health, and a lot of chicken people.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So there was no consensus on this, there would?
Sound like there was.
Some of the chicken people wanted to retain the right to slaughter on site,
Right.
and others
Others-
felt that it wasn't a good idea in an urban setting, for reasons of neighbors and that kind of thing.
And then there was another third that thought that you should keep your chickens forever. So it's basically 2/3 of the chicken folks were supportive of keeping this in place, the
The Board of
prohibition.
Health was in favor of it.
Yeah, so let's leave it in. No one's next one.
So just in terms, I just want to clarify, there is the one section in the zoning that really talks about the 3 or fewer ducks or hens. This would just sort of replace just that tiny piece of the household pet section. You didn't talk about pigeons or doves or anything like that. Okay.
Right.
I
Are there
just have-
provisions on pigeons and doves?
In the existing.
Yeah, part of the household pets, including dogs, cats, fish, birds. They didn't put hamsters in here though. It's kind of a bummer.
Sounds like you got a couple of
Parrots.
them.
What's that?
You're violating the law because you have a few, right?
I don't like rodents.
Oh.
Are you allowed to slaughter
Daniel, you have to tell.
another kind of animal on site?
Well, it's not in zoning. Again, it's a Board of Health thing, I think.
Right, exactly.
What's that?
I'm just gonna say, at your last meeting, I think you established that the issue of slaughtering, et cetera, was not really under the purview of zoning, but was actually the Board of Health or Agriculture or so on.
Yeah, if you could just leave it for the committee to talk now,
Oh, I'm
sorry. But just to clarify, the Board of Health got back to us and asked us to include that one provision because they're not sure that they're going to be writing additional regulations.
I just have one other, on 5, the sentence, for example, in URC. The only problem with that is if any of those provisions with regard to URC should change. So
Do you want to just,
we
do you want me to just remove that one?
We might just delete that.
We had talked about wanting it actually in there so that everything you needed to know was in there, but I agree that we could, if it changes, then there's going to be a discrepancy between the language in this and the dimensional tables.
We have to wait to see if it changes.
Should we just scratch that line?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easily covered by saying, attachment 2 of the dimensional regulations for detached accessory structures.
Okay. And then,
But it doesn't, the thing is, this is your recommendation. So if you're asking me to put it in zoning language, I probably wouldn't put it in there for the zoning language, so.
okay.
But we do want to make it user-friendly. We have people jumping all over the document, and it's a nice thing. So if there's a way to do it when we do have the standards, it'd be cool to put it there. That was the logic, I think, I remember us to charge.
But
Well,
I do think that the dimensional tables are something that people, are used widely on the other hand.
Yeah, it's not an obscure part of it.
Well, the other piece of it is, the way we're talking about reorganizing the zoning is putting the uses with the dimensions. So under URA, it's going to say accessory, up to 12 chickens, and here are the requirements.
That's good.
Coops
Right.
have to be. So ultimately, it will be all together.
Consolidated.
And then this last line actually was sort of brought from the last version, but I just want to make sure that this is okay, that for coops under 6 feet in height, you're not subject to the minimum open space requirement. So we're saying that coops are subject to all the requirements of detached accessory structures, but on that line in the zoning, it'll say you can't have a detached accessory structure unless the property has at least 30% open space or something like that. So I just said that a small coop under a certain height isn't subject to that open space requirement.
I would say that, I don't know that, I think that opens up another can of worms, because 6 feet, again, you could have a really long coop if you have, for whatever reason, you want to have a large area for your chickens. I think maybe a square footage, if you're interested in that, might make sense. Or if you have a mobile coop, that you move around your property, it's inevitably going to be smaller, so maybe that makes sense. Because people might have a stationary structure, because the way it's defined is any structure, and if you've got a coop that's just stationary, it could be pretty big even if it's under 6 feet.
So you're allowed to have a mobile structure?
What's that?
You're allowed to have a mobile structure?
Well, the ones I've seen, people just pick them up and move them to a
Yeah.
different location in their yard, and that,
Would that be regulated by accessory structure rules anyway? Are mobile structures regulated by accessory structure rules?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the size and the nature of it. I mean, I don't know what this will do for people, you know, if they have 12 chickens, if all of a sudden they're going to start building, you know, bigger boxes. So that, I think that would be the concern. Right now, I think, particularly when you have 3 or 5 or whatever, you're probably going to have a pretty small covered area that you might move around your yard. So in that sense, I would say no, it's almost like a rabbit hutch and it's not really impervious surface, so why should we consider that? But I think just a blanket statement about anything under 6 feet might cast a wider net than really is appropriate.
I think so.
Square footage would make sense.
Or maybe just getting rid of that entirely. Coops are not subject to minimum open space requirements, because I think the whole idea that it was in there to begin with was so that you could have chickens even if you were in an urban lot that had 20% open space. You know, that you could, right, because right now those open space requirements are quite high. And there's lots of non-conforming lots in the city.
Yeah, open space isn't probably as much of a non-conforming issue as some of the others, but yeah, it depends on where you are.
And we could do a square footage thing if that makes sense, because then it won't be then like a ginormous McMansion coop. I think maybe it's better just to leave it off instead of trying to calculate every, I mean, I think the other thing is when there's a certain size structure, you have to get a building permit. So if you're building a big structure, then you're going to come in and you're going to show your open space requirement. You're going to show that it's, Right.
you know, an accessory structure and on and on. So.
Well, what's the threshold for that? I'm just curious. I mean, if someone just wanted to build a little, you know, 8 foot by 5 foot by 6 foot.
I don't want to be quoted on it because I don't know the exact number.
But there is a specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are you suggesting, Caroline? You're suggesting we
Just leave it off because I
just
think.
remove that line. Okay. So you're saying that people might put coops up and not be meeting the open space requirements, but it's not a big deal because they don't have to pull a building permit until the structure is a certain size?
Right.
Okay.
And effectively, it might be moving around, so it's not really taking up the yard area because it's not entirely coverage. You know, I mean, you have a little, you know, rain protection on the top, but not on the sides or the bottom, you know, typically.
So if I don't have to pull a building permit for something, is it then not subject to the zoning, or just nobody's ever going to know about it because I didn't get a building permit for it? In other words, if I wanted to build something that's 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, right on my property line, I don't have to pull a building permit for it.
Probably not, because it's probably not going to be grounded anywhere and you can easily move it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to put a shed in, it might not trigger a building permit, but they still look at it for zoning compliance because they want to make sure your shed is 4 feet from the property boundary. But it might only be, you know, 25 square feet or whatever, but 6 feet tall.
Anything else? Is that okay then? We'll drop that provision?
So, I guess I'm back to the whole building permit. Do we have to put anything in here about a building permit?
No.
Because it's covered,
Yeah.
other areas will dictate.
Okay,
Okay.
then we're there.
But if they start seeing clients in that coop,
Foghorn Leghorn.
Okie dokie. Congratulations. We moved a few things out of committee.
That was our first challenge to the chickens.
Yeah.
yeah.
2 years later, the chickens are
So
dead.
wait, let me just clarify before you go on. The whole slide, please.
Yeah.
Your recommendation is to keep the restriction on slaughtering in place. I just have one other question about that. This, I suppose, actually I think I can figure this out myself. It's under the accessory use, so it's not dictated by a farm. Because if you have a farm, you can do that stuff. Because you're not following the accessory use of residential.
So, you're gonna write some language then, but we're not gonna necessarily approve it. I think we're just gonna append it to the report at the end,
Right.
with the recommendations. Okay.
Sounds
Prove it
good.
if we have time.
if we have time, we could take a look at it. Do we want to do that? Take a look at the language?
I'm fine with providing the framework. And it's,
Well, you'd have to write up the language in the next 2 weeks than we have. I don't know, you know your time.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try to get to it. I have a bunch of other priorities ahead of it, so.
We won't tell the chicken people what you said.
They've been waiting a long time.
They may find out.
Okay.
Well, the good news is for the chicken people is that they can anticipate being legal. Because part of what's going on is a lot of these guys already have
A 6-month process after this.
a number of chickens.
Yeah.
So,
They'll be legal someday.
right.
Yeah.
I
There'll
think
be
they'll
another
be
generation
fine.
of chickens by
Well,
the
there
time.
still
this-
needs to be, the public hearings.
Right, right.
The goat people won't be happy, but the chicken people.
Well, the goat people didn't show up to these forums. We were open to discussing both, and it was all chickens and one goat person who didn't live in Northampton. So we felt that while they had some interesting things to say, that we really needed to focus on Northampton zone for people who live here.
But they can have goats in Greenfield. Just so you know.
What about the wild turkey people? I keep having wild turkeys on my lawn. Every morning I wake up and there's a wild turkey walking across my lawn.
Can't slaughter them, so.
They're wild.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I know what I'm thinking of.
You're in violation of zoning.
I think they did it on his own
Get
free
some
will.
in a box and
I'll drop a box on him. Then I'll be out of compliance. As soon as I put the turkey in a box.
okay.
Okay,
This is private property.
thank you. So, okay, we've got about 40 minutes left. We'll get through as much of this as we can. You want to start?
Sure. So we're looking at Danny and I's proposed changes to dimensional and design standards. Since we're probably not going to get through it line by line, does anybody have any general comments before we start? Might be useful to just identify the areas where there's controversy and hit those.
I have a question before we do that. Did I miss when you guys went off and did this?
Yes.
That you guys were gonna sit down and come up with this level of detail?
Well, at the last meeting when we kind of went through the summary,
Right.
then I thought that
I don't remember, were you at that meeting?
I think you missed one.
Is that the one I missed?
okay.
Yeah.
So we spent a while on the summary,
Yeah.
which is sort of the outline of what this ended up getting detailed. So then we said, okay, we're ready to put together a more detailed proposal. So this is it. Although quite a bit of it, I'm sure you noticed, if you had time to look at it, is just a summary of what we did and the public input we received. First 6 pages of it, or 4 pages of it almost. And then a lot of it towards the end is just comparison tables that can be removed later, but just for the ability to take a really quick glance at some of it. So it could be shorter.
And so the idea was that this is the product that goes to the planning board, and it's what the planning board can use to evaluate sort of the thinking and the recommendations, so they know why the recommendations are what the recommendations are.
Okay. I guess, sorry, just one of the things that, one of the things that, this thing caught me, a lot of it's factual, but a lot of it's very subjective. For example, on page 12 is this statement. Residents, you're talking about URC residents. People in residents of URC accept and even appreciate being close to neighbors, moderate traffic, and on-street parking. They also are, typo, accustomed to change, having experienced several waves of condo conversions and multifamily housing renovations. I don't think any condo development went into URC since I've lived here that didn't go in without controversy. North Street, City View Apartments, I don't know where.
The street's not URC.
Well, no, URC already has its urban character. Residents accept, yada, yada, yada. Because it's in the URB section, but you're comparing URB to URC. I think if anybody in URC saw that, I don't know where some of the stuff came from. So I'd be curious where you guys got some of the stuff like that. That didn't come from a forum. And I don't remember anybody in Bridge Street School standing up and saying, hey, I live in URC, and we're great with condos. So I'm just curious, where did a lot of this stuff come from?
From my perspective, a lot of it came from hearing the conversations we've had in this room, hearing the conversations we've had in the forum, conversations with other people outside of, private conversations with people, and it's interpretation. It's framed as interpretation. We heard public feedback, synthesizing it. That's my perspective on that point. As the ZRC takes this forward, you're welcome to cut, modify, rework, any of this, however we want as a board to get to a work product that comes out of our 2 years of work. My perception coming out of the last forums is that URC is dramatically different from Florence in terms of people's acceptance of infill. I think it has to do with the existing character of the neighborhoods and sort of that people in URC are used to more change more often than people in other districts. It's my interpretation.
Yeah, I guess you didn't sit through the years of North Street condos or City View. I mean,
Is North Street condos in URC?
yeah.
Borders, straddles the
URB?
border.
It's,
It's URB.
URB.
It's URB, but it's across the street is URC.
Yeah.
So, and the North Street condos is part of the reason that this specifically limits the discussion to 1 to 4 family, 1 to 4 unit properties, and separates out those larger things because of the controversy around North Street and similar projects.
I guess my first thought on it, without getting into the details, is this is a lot of stuff from you and Danny, not from the ZRC. And I'm not sure in the time we have left that we're going to be able to go through this, synthesize it, boil it down to something that can come out. I'm concerned, maybe other people don't feel this way, but that there's a way of the short time we have left to boil this down and say, yes, this is what the ZRC feels. I mean, there's so much in here that is new.
Well, I mean, a lot of this is just expanding upon the hour-and-a-half discussion we had about the summary.
The 50 contiguous square feet per dwelling that came
Yeah,
out
so
of
some
that.
of those are new ideas, but the general principles of focusing on 1 to 4 unit dwellings in URC, and then like the smaller infill. That was what we talked about at the last meeting.
And
I
on
mean,
page
the main
4, that
points we
bulleted
hit.
list that says this is the order on the top of page 4.
That's just trying to interpret. I think trying to interpret some of the feedback that we got. Yes, it's definitely subjective and it's ours, but it's attempting to interpret it in a way that will be useful to make zoning recommendations. So we got a lot of feedback. The question is, how do we organize that feedback and interpret it? What did it mean for zoning?
But the question tonight is, how do we talk about it?
Yep.
And maybe we should figure out which things we are consensing about, and then see which ones we really need to talk about more, because we're not there.
Yeah.
Can we go through with that? Would that work for you, Steve?
We can, but I mean, I'll be honest, we would get this on Monday night, and I haven't had that much time to read it. It's 18 pages long, and there's a lot of
Well,
stuff
we
in
could
here.
just walk through the main points. Why don't we?
We have 35 minutes, we'll get as
still
far as
have
we
some
can.
time. I think some of this, I think maybe other people in the community are a little more familiar with, just because we went through quite a lot of these points at the last, when we reviewed the summary at the last one. But the details, the actual dimensions, haven't been discussed yet. So
Right.
this is the first time.
I'm more accepted. I mean, the actual numbers I'm more comfortable with. The subjective parts of it are the parts that I have a lot more issue.
well, I was going to say too, I mean, for whatever goes forward, if we have the time to get to the point of anything going forward, I think the commentary and the analysis should we can look at it and talk about it, but I think it's a much more straightforward document. That stuff, it just comes out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can append some of it or get rid of it.
But before we go through, I mean, so much of this is technical. I'd be curious, Carolyn, what, if you want to give us a staff, and maybe you haven't had enough time to look at it, even do that, but I'd want to be informed by staff opinion on this before, engaging in a whole lot of deliberation. You know, that's why we have expertise on staff is to comment on this. And as I alluded to, you know, I think it would have been more efficient if, in moving from broad principle to detail, it had been done collaboratively with staff. Then we know that something that's coming to us builds in our professional input as opposed to.
We did actually, I think I responded,
Yeah.
we had Carolyn comment
let's
extensively on a draft before the one that you saw.
Right, but
So-
when it moved from that to specific numbers, and the
Did she see the
specific,
numbers? Did she see the
Yes,
specific numbers?
she saw.
She wrote, Danielle wrote us about that. Carolyn has wait.
Well,
let's let
Carolyn's sitting here, let's let her.
Yeah.
That's what I'm turning to.
Yeah, why don't we ask
Tell us what you did.
Yeah.
I mean, the first brush that I did was, you know, I looked for technical clarifications, I think, on the first draft. I didn't really go through a lot of sort of, and I think my comments a couple of weeks ago were more that I wondered if there was, I like some of the concepts but fleshing out some of the details, we just really haven't had the public input to be able to go forward on some of those details or even pull in some of the public comments that have come from other directions as opposed to just these last two forums that were not, you know, necessarily broadly attended by, you know, the entire city. We had very focused neighborhoods that were at those forums. So I do have a concern about, I like a lot of the concepts, but there are several items, and as it gets more detailed, I think there's just not enough time to really go through and put forward a fully fleshed out ordinance to the planning board. And I think there are a lot of complex items in here that haven't really been fleshed out. The solar access issue could be extraordinarily complicated, and we don't even know if the general public wants to go in that direction. You know, we heard one comment at the forum and some yays, yeah, I like that idea, but I don't know if that's enough to say we need to go down this road. And sort of figuring out the numbers, what are we protecting, so therefore what should the numbers be. You know, I think some of this stuff just hasn't been fully vetted, so I have a concern about putting something so detailed forward at this level when you've got, you know, you don't have enough time to really go forward. And then some of the details about setbacks and things like that, and thrown in design issues, I think those all need to take time in and of themselves to sort of hash out. So I think it's a lot of information to try to go over in a little bit of time.
So does that mean we table it? Because we have one or two more meetings. Does it go in any form, anywhere from us?
No, I mean, I think I recommended at the last meeting that it makes sense to say, here are the concepts we think we've heard, you know, A, B, and C need to be addressed because they're dramatically out of character with current zoning, and it certainly isn't going to allow sustainable development, to have sustainable development going forward. There needs to be adjustments, and you've identified those. Design guidelines are important, but maybe not so detailed because we felt pushback from the public forum. Those kinds of things we've identified. I think those can go forward in a recommendation, but there's other information that could be brought to bear on the whole issue of drafting the ordinance that you all either haven't seen or haven't had the time to really analyze. So I think it makes it hard as a committee to sort of be able to wrap your heads around all of that information in a short amount of time. So I do think that concepts, it makes sense to go forward with recommendation about concepts of what you think you've heard about infill development.
Well, would you be willing to show us specifically something you think really should go in? I'm just looking at, there's a lot here, and a lot of what you just said is a lot of what's here. And then there's something that you're saying shouldn't go forward. Could you distinguish? Because I saw this first whole section as key points, public feedback, summary, and then it gets into key points for short-term changes, and then it ends up with possible medium and long-term recommendations. Which, in that first section on, this is all about the dimensional design standards proposal, what thing would you not have us go forward with? Give somebody on the planning board.
Well, I think the details about what, so the details in the design standards, I don't think,
What page is that?
I'm on page 5. Some of those details on each of one of those items, 1 through 4, you know, may not be applicable, or let's say the design standards, establish design standards that only apply to larger projects. And again, I think some of the, and where, you know, special permit versus site plan might be put in, I think that's a level of detail that maybe that needs to be fleshed out more, and sort of in thinking about the bigger picture, as opposed to trying to identify exactly what site plan and what special permit and where design guidelines might apply, and sort of taking a step back and saying design guidelines may be important but not applicable to every project, kind of thing, as opposed to saying here's where they will apply and here's where they shouldn't apply.
So that's an example of what you'd modify, but it's much of what, you got up to page 5, so the first 4 pages you'd.
Well, I didn't really, yeah, I mean, you know, I think this is all analysis. This is what, you know, you guys did, so you found these issues, and yeah, I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with providing sort of that as the background. And I think that's what you guys have talked about anyway, sort of how you're going to do a final report. So here are all the things that you think you heard, and here are your recommendations. I think when it gets into the level of detail is where I think there's just not enough time to really pull in all the information necessary to do something as detailed as you proposed. And I think that some of the recommendations are, you know, I think the solar issue is not fleshed out.
What
I think
page?
that 6, solar access. It's not clear what we'd be protecting and why, and you know, how that might relate to setbacks, you know, and who gets relief from design standards and what those design standards are. And then some of the specifics
Is
about
anybody writing this
setbacks.
down? Because this could be what would, ideas for what goes forward. Do we need to, maybe Carolyn's writing it down, or has written it down.
Sure, she could write us a memo.
Yeah, could you?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally there's some assertions that are put forward about, in the details, that it's not clear where they came from or what they would address. So I think that maybe it doesn't make sense, because there isn't time to vet all of that, to really put that forward. So like a maximum setback of 20 feet, why does that apply, and how is that applicable to all districts?
Can I respond to some of that? I think that there are some places where we could simplify and say this isn't totally fleshed out. But on the other hand, we've been talking about this for 2 years, and if all we sent on is, oh, and we had these nice little forums, and here's what we heard, some issues for further consideration. I mean, we know the numbers. We've talked about 10-foot and 20-foot setbacks. We've talked about dimensional averaging. We've talked about parking standards. We've looked at the dimensional standards for hours on hours, and we've gone and talked to the community about it. And so I feel like at this point, if we're not going to try to put something at some level of detail together, then we've kind of wasted our time a little bit. I don't want to be harsh, but I don't know that I'm going to be the person that writes that summary, if that's the case, because I think that after 2 years of work, we should have something that we move forward that actually is something. It may not be this level of detail, but there's some proposals here that I think merit discussions, which is why I was thinking there's no way we can finish by the end of April, if we actually want to have something versus nothing. I mean, if we're fine with chickens and home occupations and a summary of our public meetings, then fine. Someone should write that up, and then we shouldn't have detailed recommendations. But personally, there are some issues, I agree, Carolyn, like design standards and solar, where maybe it doesn't make sense to fully flesh them out at this point, but you know, particularly with regard to the dimensional tables, we spent a lot of time talking about this and thinking about it. To not send anything forward at this point, fine, if that's what you want to do, but it does seem like this has taken a lot of our lives to not put anything forward.
I've heard repeatedly from Wayne that the devil is in the details, so I think making an attempt at the details makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the detail, like you talked about, you know, the concept of breaking down the lot size, and I think a number is great. But I think beyond that, there, you know, I think I agree that it makes sense to say, here's where we think the dimensions should go. I'm not arguing with that. I guess when it gets down even further, you know, your depths and your maximum setbacks and things like that, it's not clear where maximum front setback comes from except for a design principle. But again, it's more of an urban-centric focus. It might not apply in B and C, and it might not apply in all of URC. So I think that kind of
Is it possible
detail.
for the OPD to do the work that it would take to get reasonable numbers that are based on existing conditions, to do the GIS analysis that would tell you what reasonable front setbacks are, reasonable frontages are?
Well, no, I think the reasonable I think you all have done reasonable setbacks. I wonder where you get the maximum setbacks and the zero depths and those kinds of things that no one's really talked about. I mean, you've talked about front and side setbacks.
In there for discussion, and I was thinking we would go through the proposal at some point and kind of talk, what is the purpose of depth? You know, is that something we want to touch at all, since we're looking at the table? You know, but it seems like there's just a few of those, like the setbacks. I think that, you know, we have pretty good rationale on that. Plus, we've got the dimensional averaging approach through the design standards as sort of a relief mechanism. So for your block, you could, you know, average instead of using whatever's there. I mean, I think for the most part, what's there has been talked about before at some level in some proposal or some analysis that we've run. There are a few new things, I agree.
Was there a way to do that information for the rest of us for the next meeting? The things that are, the reasons for the things that we've talked about and have reasons, the ones that are a little looser and need discussion. Differentiate so we really know a plan of attack for the next meeting. Because I agree with you that it would be good to have something to go forward with that was substantially more detailed than 2 years ago when we started. But if these things are in different categories, maybe they can be categorized. If they exist in categories.
So highlighting what we've already pretty much talked about.
With real rationales, because Carolyn's saying, where did it come from? Why is it 20? You know, as one example of the setback. So, next, say this came because, or you know, it has the explanation in it, or you can make it real easily. I think it should be in it if we're sending it. And then the ones that are vaguer or more less discussed here, but came across as important because they're in the state tables. Is that? I'm just asking if that's possible in the next step. And because when we end here, we're going to talk about how many meetings and when. We can decide that that's really what we're going to do. We're not going to talk about home occupation. It's done. We're not going to talk about this is what's left. Right?
I mean, alternatively, you know, you could put together the concepts and the stuff that you have details on, say, here's where we think we should go with dimensions in UR A, B, and C, you know, 3,200 square feet for 1 through 4. Haven't fleshed out the details of the other setback, you know, you have front, side, and rear for these reasons, but all the other dimensions, including open space, you know, recommendation that maybe open space should be addressed in order to accommodate smaller lot sizes, but didn't really flesh out the open space as opposed to trying to get to that point. So, I mean, that was really my point, is that there are a few things that, yeah, you've talked about a ton, and I think it makes sense to sort of confirm with the committee whether 3,200 is the right number or what have you. But there's so many of those numbers that, you know, no one's really discussed, like the, you know, the open space number and how you got to 50 feet in URC versus 400 feet in other districts is, you know, takes a lot more vetting, I think.
But it's also important to remember that these are the two people that were chosen because this is their expertise. And they have come back to us with having sifted through a ton of talking with ideas. So we either, I think, discuss them and decide if we support them or table. That was their role in this committee.
I have a suggestion. That I was actually hoping to hear you walk us through it tonight. And if you could give us like an overview. I didn't think we were going to come out of here tonight with a yay or nay vote. And that if you could walk us through the proposal in, you know, the time we have left, and then we can go home and read it with your input as part of that, and then we can discuss it further next time. I opened up the 325 one as opposed to the 328 one. There's about a 10-page difference. So that's the one I read prior to the meeting. So,
I mean, the numbers I think are the things that reflect the amount of the work. That's the thing I have the least amount of trouble with. It's the stuff that's either subjective or stuff we haven't talked about. The solar stuff, I don't remember us ever talking about a lot of the solar stuff. That's where I struggle with it. I mean, you guys might have talked about it, but we didn't talk about it. We certainly didn't talk about it that level of detail in any forum that we had. And it's very late in the process to start adding that kind of stuff. We've talked a ton about the numbers. You know, the numbers in here are the stuff that we
Well,
spent most of our time
let's just
talking
start walking through,
Just a little
let's see how
walk
far
through
we
and then-
get, and then we'll leave 5 minutes at the end to decide. I mean, I think we have at least one more meeting, so probably more than one more, because we also have a final report we're gonna need to approve that packs everything together at some point. So should we just start walking through then?
yeah,
Stop
and
at 5:03.
give us the big picture of what you put together here, and then we'll,
Right,
Okay, the big picture,
going right to the
Beginning-
specifics.
what's that?
Beyond the analysis, the actual,
Yeah, so the beginning starts with analysis. It's got 3 pages of summary of analysis and public feedback. At the top of page 4, there's an interpretation of public feedback, which is purely coming from Danny and I. And it's summarizing sort of the kinds of projects we think would be acceptable and unacceptable, and therefore what kind of zoning would be acceptable and unacceptable to people. Proposed improvements on page 4. There are recommendations for accessory apartments. On page 5, recommendations for using planned unit development, special permit to deal with cottage and pocket housing and adaptive reuse. 2 topics we've talked about previously. Number 3 there says change dimensional tables, and then we detail that later on in the proposal. Number 4 talks about design standards. So basically we're saying apply design standards with site plan review to all new construction which is above a certain size.
Did we talk about that?
We
We
had a
talked about that.
discussion about that. And we were kind of going back and forth about what the trigger point was
Right.
the last time that we
You
talked
put a
about it.
figure in.
We had, I believe we had 500 feet last time, we upped it to 700 feet based on,
So that should be one example of something we should talk about again, because it was not something that all of us agreed
Yeah.
and then we went through, it goes through what the standards should be and apply to. And the basic idea is that they should be very vague, that the solar is a new idea. The idea is that solar access regulates both the sun on a house, which people find important, but it also regulates how buildings are related to each other. So it's a way of dealing with setbacks and building massing and height as they affect neighboring properties.
to. Where did you get that from, that whole definitional thing? Where's that from? That's work that other communities have done? First, a new structure may not shade any point above the first floor.
Yeah, it's based on research of solar access
It sounds cool, but
provisions
I think we
in
haven't
other
gotten that
communities.
specific.
Yeah, but the idea with the solar, you know, we did hear a few comments at the public meetings
Yep.
about people who were upset about additions or expansions that had not just gotten rid of open space as they perceived it, but had somehow inhibited the solar access to their house. And so it's a way kind of to get a little bit at, you know, that protection. And so that's sort of, it was to sort of address an issue that we heard at the forums.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the solar access to deal with light and building placement and massing, saying the principal residential structure should have a front door that faces the street and a pathway from the front door.
I think I removed that. Did I?
No, it's still on there.
Okay.
Unless they feel like, you know, there are options for people to get out of that. What's this next one?
So basically, just to summarize on the design standards, you know, what I think we thought we heard was that people really didn't want extremely specific design standards. And they also didn't want design standards to over-regulate or push any one kind of architectural style over another. So what this left us with is design standards that regulate protection of your solar rights, and some really basic things about how your house relates to the street in terms of the front door and sidewalk, but none of the, you know, that's very, very streamlined basic design standards is all that remained here based on the feedback we heard at the forums.
And discussion, we talked about it too.
Did you want to go through details now, or are you going to go through the
No,
whole
they-
thing and then come back?
Just wanted to be
Let's
walked
do-
through.
Let's for a summary.
Yeah. and-
Sorry, I got into detail, my bad.
So number 5 there is, it's not really a zoning, it's not a recommendation that's about implementation in the zoning code. It's saying, because the public doesn't seem to want to have binding zoning, binding design standards, the city could produce a document that basically explains what's relevant about building design in the city that homeowners and developers could use to make decisions about appropriate design in the city. It's non-binding. I'm sorry, Adam, you're going to keep on going. And then starting on page 6, we go through zone by zone, sort of the challenges, analysis for that, and some proposed solutions. Recognizing that the zones themselves have different problems and solutions. So there are some proposed dimensional changes for URC, and then URB and URA. All of them make a distinction between in URC between 1 to 4 family houses, and then anything above. In URB, I think it's 1 to 3 family, and then 1 to 2 in URA. So saying basically treat small projects differently from big projects is one of the big concepts here. Another very big concept here is detaching the number of units from the lot size, which is that performance-based approach that we've talked about, that we presented to the public. So it's saying, if you have enough lot size to have any unit in URC, you can have up to 4, as long as you can meet the setbacks, have the open space, and have the adequate parking. And then there are numbers specifically for lot size, frontage, depth, etc. Another big concept in here is keeping the frontage relatively high, because it appeared to me and Danny from the public forums that people were concerned about splitting lots and building buildings between buildings, so that, like Arnie said, the rhythm of buildings is created by the spaces between them. So I think people are concerned about filling in the spaces between buildings. Keeping the frontage relatively high prevents lots from being split along the street frontage.
Well, so we don't, since this is going out for public view, the idea isn't to prevent all new filling in of gaps, because there are appropriate places along street
Not when you
frontages.
have an extremely large lot that would be appropriate to split, but where you have like URB neighborhoods where, you know.
Well, as long as you have 65 feet of frontage, or whatever the number is that you come up
Right,
with.
you would need, in order to split lots in this proposal, you would have to have double the minimum lot size, and you would have to have double the frontage requirements. You would need 130 feet of frontage, for example, and you would need at least.
Which is only slightly different from what it is today.
Right, you
basically.
need an empty lot.
So
Yeah.
we're proposing
65-foot lot.
we're proposing reducing the lot size by almost, half in URC, but the frontage is only changing from 75 to 65 feet. So the scale of change there is very different from lot size than it is for frontage.
So the idea is we want to allow flexibility on these small infill development projects to go from 1 to 4 family and back as things change over time, but we don't want to allow for lots to be easily split that are a typical size for that neighborhood. But if it were huge and out of scale for that neighborhood, then it could be split, but it would have to be quite large. So most lots would not be splittable under the proposals, just allowing kind of flexibility on a given lot as it exists today to go up and down from 1 to 4 families in URC, 1 to 3 in URB, and 1 to 2 in URA. But we haven't actually proposed any changes to any projects that are larger. So for example, I don't know, a 10-unit multifamily project tomorrow would have the same requirements as a 10-unit multifamily project today, because this wouldn't actually touch anything other than very small scale infill, 1 to 4 family.
And we heard about that a lot from people. They wanted that flexibility. We built it.
Okay, so the open space, 50 square feet, in the table there it says 50 to 200 square feet. Basically, we don't know what the appropriate number is for open space, or really what the function of the open space in the current zoning is, what the function of the open space requirement is, right? So I think we need to know first what the function of the open space requirement is, and then how to regulate it. The idea is that no matter how much open space we ultimately think people should have, maybe it makes more sense to make it a contiguous block of open space as opposed to a percentage. So if it's about functional greens, if open space is about functional green space for people, let's make it a contiguous functional space as opposed to a percent, which could be spread around a lot and not very useful for people.
If it's about at the bottom of each chart where it says, because it says open, which one are you looking at, what page?
I'm on page 8.
Some of them to have percentages too, still.
Well, we change,
Just under
the current is 30%. And then
Single family, I see it's 30% to 50 square feet. Both, single and two family.
Yeah, so, well, it's
So
two.
what, you want to say where you came up with the 50?
50. Originally it was 200, and that was based on a 20 by 20 area,
Yeah.
which is the size of a community garden plot. It's basically a reasonable size if you want to grow your own food, if you want to have a little chair with a picnic table, 20 by 20 square feet works. We brought it down to 50 with the idea that maybe in URC people weren't actually going to be able to provide enough open space to be able to do development, because most of these lots are pretty much, a lot of them are paved in buildings and there isn't open space. And so as a way to get around that, developers, the idea Danny came up with was developers could provide sort of indoor-outdoor spaces like porches or green roofs.
Right. But this is for URC only, to
For
be
URC
clear.
only.
It was 20 by 10 for 200, not 20 by 20, right? You said
Yes,
20 by 20.
sorry, 400 square feet it was originally. 20 by 20. The number is, it's a number, and it's not
Yeah.
well developed. It's
It's
one of the
numbers-
things we would
Well,
actually
but that's really
define.
helpful to hear the rationale mix.
It's to say kind of, what would you need? If you wanted a small outdoor space in the densest zoning district of our, densest residential zoning district of our city, what would be appropriate? And, you know, a lot of places off of Market Street don't have any backyards at all. It does seem appropriate when you get to a certain residential density, which some of our densest neighborhoods have, to allow for green roofs and porches and things like that to meet people's need to be connected with the outdoors in their home. But then once you get to URB, that's not an acceptable solution anymore. People expect everybody to have a little yard once you get to URB. So that was why the approaches were different for the two districts.
And I think it's important to notice that those setbacks are already providing a lot of open space.
well, yeah, so if you got a 65-foot wide lot and 10, there's 650 feet.
Right. So I'm not sure that we even need a percentage open space unless it's about stormwater. And I kind of wonder if stormwater should be regulated in a different way than open space in zoning.
Well, it's-
But open space can accommodate, and does in most cities across anywhere, accommodate all of those needs. You know, there's not just one thing that you're trying to accommodate. You know, the ag people want to be able to grow corn in their front yard or wheat or whatever, and they want to have chickens. you know, the urban design people want to have outdoor rooms they can design, and the other people want to have a little bit of separation between their homes, and people who move from New York want to not feel like they're in Manhattan anymore. So it serves all of those purposes, and so I don't think that necessarily that the open space, that you have to go down one path and say, here's the number because we're going to target the people who want to grow wheat, or we want to target the people who want a little space to have a picnic or what have you. But think about it. So I guess I would argue that you don't necessarily need contiguity in a block. I mean, the other thing is contiguity can also mean wrapping around your entire property, including the setbacks. But I think because they meet so many purposes, that it does make sense that you think of it in a total package and not necessarily in a square that might be usable for one thing but not necessarily another. So setbacks and that open space in the setback is important in its own right.
Starting to get into the details, it's 4 minutes out, we have to think that. Can these be cool to figure out which are the ones that we really need to, this is one, obviously.
Yeah, open space is definitely a key area of discussion. I think that we have a pretty good idea. But I think what we'll need to talk about is, does this general approach, if we want to have detailed proposals rather than just summarizing what we've heard, is this general approach of saying, we're going to come in with a scalpel and we're just going to look at 1 to 4 family homes, and we're not going to touch anything else, and we're going to look at accessory apartments, and we're going to sort of tweak a couple of these things to allow for this small scale infill. Is this an acceptable approach for the committee to move forward with? I think it's a big question that we need to answer, because that's the crux of the proposal.
That's the question number 1 next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I will struggle with any of the subjective parts, any of the parts that are just like you guys added that never went out to the public, the solar stuff.
But what you just described, yeah, that sounds, I mean, that's kind of what I was
Yeah,
expecting.
the numbers are,
would result.
that's, yeah, that's,
The specific number of proposals for what you just described, yeah. I mean, sort of strip this down to the basics in those areas.
right.
So why doesn't everybody in the committee go through and redline the things that you feel like are not
Yeah.
appropriate to be in there? And
Redline the document.
We'll have a conversation about it.
You mean you want us to email it to you before the meeting, or?
No, bring it with you.
Okay.
And when is the next meeting?
We'll
2
go through
weeks
it
from
line by
tonight or
line.
next week? Next week's the first Wednesday.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
That's when you add a meeting.
The 6th. April 6th.
That's next Wednesday. Wait, I think we need to decide, are we doing 1 more, 2 more, and what are the dates of this? 6 and 20
I
for
think
the
that,
first and
I
third.
think that at minimum, we'll need the 20th, because whatever comes out of our discussion on the 6th, then we're gonna have to revise the document and finish that and review it on the 20th. And we're also gonna have to have some kind of like a summary document, which I think we sort of have in various places, lots of documents that we've approved and worked on. But sort of have like a final report that just sort of gets all padded together.
Put a subcommittee, because I'm done on the 20th, that's my absolute last day for me. I know where other people are, but I got the book. I set aside to the 20th, assuming we would go to that, and that was the end of 2
Well,
years.
let's shoot for it, and see if we can hit it.
And we're gonna be back in there.
So the 20th?
So we got the 6th and 20th.
We're back in City Hall.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm assuming Jim has 30 or 40 copies of that stashed away, right, Jim?
Well, publicists.
I don't need to, it's all online.
Not everybody gets that. Got it.
Oh, yeah, that's right, that's right.
Those were the days.